Okay, good morning to everybody who's coming today. We're going to be talking about part 1, English speaking, because part 1 is so important. Part 1 is important because this is when you first meet the examiner and you sort of need to impress them, I suppose. So today we're going to be looking at IELTS speaking, part 1 questions and the opening questions. I think there's a lot that people don't really know about part 1. They just think they're ordinary questions, but they're not really. Obviously, in our courses, we go into much more detail about this. And in our open courses, which are 1 hour long, of course, we can give you a lot more examples. But let's see how we go. Now, as you probably know, the IELTS speaking format is in 3 parts. We have our introduction and interview, where the examiner introduces themselves and confirms your identity. Please be aware that in this section, when the examiner asks you what is your name and where do you come from, they're just checking the details, so you don't need to give long answers in this section here, right? This is just if someone says to you, what's your name? And you go, I'm Bill Smith. Where do you come from? I come from Guizhou. And that's all you need to say, because they're just checking your details on the sheet that they're given. Then the examiner interviews you give you some verbal questions based on familiar topics. As we'll see, there are some traditionally at the beginning, you're asked a set of standard questions, either about your life as a student, your hometown, or where you live, your house. Then in part 2, the examiner asks you to speak for 1 to 2 minutes on a topic, and where you're given instructions and very content-focused questions or prompts. And then at the end, they ask you 1 or 2 questions at the end of the long term. Of course, we'll be looking at part 2 in a different class. And then in part 3, which is based loosely on the question in part 2, they ask that we have a big discussion about, a deeper discussion, I suppose, about the issue in part 2. Right, these parts we look at quite separately in our speaking classes because each part needs to be practiced in a different way. Now, you need to understand what we're looking for, really, to be able to judge you, right? We're looking for you to be able to keep going, to talk at natural speed without too much pausing or hesitation, not being able to repeat yourself, your ability to link your ideas together clearly so that the examiner can clearly understand you. In terms of lexical resource, which means vocabulary, we're looking at whether you have enough vocabulary to express yourself in part 1 on familiar topics, and in part 2 and 3 on more unfamiliar topics. And being able to deal with unknown or difficult vocabulary. That is, if the examiner says something that you don't understand, how to deal with that, right? Because don't forget, I can't emphasize more. The speaking test is a test of, well, let's have a look, of your conversational ability. Right, now conversational ability means your ability to have a conversation with somebody. So you don't want to be too stiff or strict when you're talking. You want to be more relaxed and use language that's more conversational, right? The kind of stuff that we'd use in a conversation. rather than what we would use in academic writing, for example, right? The vocabulary is different, as is the grammar. Then grammatical range and accuracy. The examiner is listening for what kind of grammar structures that you're using, whether these grammar structures are accurate, and how many mistakes you make, and whether you can be understood despite grammatical mistakes. We're also looking at what we call repair structures, repair strategies. Now, repair strategies are when you know that you've made a mistake, so you sort of correct yourself. This, of course, gets you higher marks, not lower marks. If a candidate can show us they can correct their own mistakes, then they are obviously of a higher level than someone who makes a mistake and does not correct it. So, these are quite different things. So repair strategies we look at as well in grammar and vocabulary. Pronunciation. This is being able to use English pronunciation features like stress and intonation, and not causing the examiner any problems in understanding what you are saying. Of course, there are ways to get around this, and the best way to do well in the exam is to understand what the IELTS speaking is testing. Not only in these 4 areas, but how you can get better quickly, which I know is what everybody wants to do, get better quickly, right? Now, generally you can't find these kind of functions in IELTS books. I don't know why, but really the IELTS speaking is testing your ability to be able to do these kind of what we call verbal functions in English, to provide personal and non-personal information, to express and justify opinions, to make suggestions, to speculate about the future or about your future, to express a preference about something, I like, I prefer, to make comparisons and discuss contrasts, to summarize, to relate personal experiences, generally in part 2, to analyze an issue, which could be part 2 and part 3, and to repair conversations and paraphrase, as I just discussed. Now, you can see that these functions, if you look at these functions or take a photo of it, you'll see that when you look at the questions, particularly in part 1 and part 3 and part 2, you'll be able to see what kind of language and functions the examiner is expecting from you. Once you learn to analyze the questions, you will certainly do much better in the test, even if you have a lower level of vocabulary or grammar. The more familiar you become with the test, the better. All right, let's look at part 1, how to answer the questions. And maybe later, one or two of you might like to try to answer the questions. All right, part 1 of the IELTS speaking exam has short, and I emphasize short here, question and answers about familiar topics for 3 or 4 minutes. There is always either a set of questions about where you live or where you work and study, and 2 additional sets of questions about familiar topics, hobbies, holidays, sports, entertainment. There are over 360 what they call familiar topics that examiners choose from. Well, actually, they choose from 15. Right, generally speaking, the general questions take between 4 to 5 minutes. You have to answer questions on either your hometown, your home, your work or your study. And then you have to answer questions about 2 other topics. The examiner themselves has around 15 topics in each folder for a weekend. And for part 1, besides the early topics, they have 10 topics to choose from. You need to give a full response, and you need to use linking words to extend your answers. And you need to focus on the language that's required, right? We'll have a look at that in a minute. So let's have a look. This is a topic about riding a bicycle, for example. So, do you like riding bicycles? Yes. Yes, because it's fun, good for health, and doesn't cost a lot. That's pretty good. Yes, I do. I like to ride a bike for a few reasons. The main reason I like riding is that I think it is really fun, and it's very good for my health because it can help me lose weight. Now, the first answer, of course, number 1 is just don't say yes and stop. The examiner is trying to see the level of your language and the level of your grammar. So you need to give them something to work with. The second answer is quite good and very natural, right? It's the kind of thing that a native speaker might say. It's not a full sentence, but it's certainly conversationally. The third one is probably the best answer, right? Because they answer the question correctly. Do you? Yes, I do. Right? And we're looking for correct answers to yes/no questions. Yes, I do. Would you? Yes, I would. Have you? Yes, I have. Are you? Yes, I am. Those kind of correct answers to those questions are expected at the Band 6 and Band 7 level. And then we have a general statement, right? I like to ride for a few reasons, which in English, generally we do this to outline what we're going to say next. The main reason I like riding is that I think it's really fun and it's very good for my health, and because it can help me lose weight. So we can see here that there are a relative clause, a conjunction, and a complex sentence. In fact, this is a complex sentence. So practicing these kind of complex sentences will definitely get you a higher mark, because immediately the examiner understands that you're a Band 6 or a Band 7, right? However, there's some bad habits that many candidates have in Part 1, that their answers are too long, right? You shouldn't have answers that are too long. About 3 sentences probably would be enough. They should be on topic, so only answer the question, right? Don't go on and on off topic, right? You need to make sure you focus on the question, and an answer needs to go from general to specific, right? As you can see in answer number 3 there. And don't keep talking. You need to have a coherent answer which answers the question, and no more than that. Now, there is a preferred answering pattern for Part 1, and this is quite typical native speaker type response, right? It's a 2-part answer. You have the question, then you answer directly, and then you give extra relevant information, right? So first, you directly answer the basic question using a short statement with the same verb tense, which is very important. You need to listen for the verb tense. Is it the present tense? Is it the past tense? Right? You need to pay attention to that. Then follow with a suitable amount of extra information, using connecting words such as because or but or since or if, depending on the question. For example, if we look at the question, how was your vacation? Was is in the past tense. So you'd say, it was excellent. I went to Hawaii with my cousin and we had a great time there, enjoying the magnificent sandy beaches and fascinating scuba diving. Right, we can see there that they use the tense correctly, and they used an ing, and they use some very good vocabulary. Right, fascinating is a bit weird, but okay. Now you need another part of part 1 is understanding the difference between short answers and longer answers. For short answers are usually yes/no questions, right? Do you enjoy learning English? Yes, I do. I think English is a difficult but enjoyable language to learn, and it's very practical. But a long answer is when it's not a yes/no question generally, and you need to give a little bit more detail. And we can see that this is in that format. What's the most difficult part of learning a language? Well, I think it is understanding the grammar. So we give a general answer and then we give some details, because it is quite different from Chinese, which means that to learn it well, you need to think in the language, which is very hard to do because language and culture are so closely linked. Right, so understanding the difference between short and longer answers is very important. Now, developing a better answer. A lot of this can be done with using what we call fillers, I suppose, like this. But these kind of fillers give you a very native speaker-like sound if you can properly use them. For example, do you read a daily newspaper? I don't, I'm afraid. Like a lot of people, excuse me, I get my news from the internet. It's so much faster. Right? I'm afraid means it's a phrase in English which means no, but it's kind of a softer phrase, I suppose. What kind of books do you like to read? Oh, all kinds, really. Right? We can see that this is our general answer. I've got about 100 books at home, different tense. Actually, non-fiction, fiction, and lots of books about art. Now, this is a very good example of using vocabulary as well. When I ask you about books, you should be able to mention fiction, non-fiction, right? Biographies or other vocabulary words. How often do you use the library? Well, I'm a student, so I'm in the library almost every day. I don't always use it to find books, though. I'm more likely to use computer facilities to look for information online. To be likely to do something. This is quite an advanced phrase, but pretty easy to learn how to use. How many hours a week do you spend reading? These days, right? These days, this is 现在的意思, right? These days, I only spend 1 or 2 hours reading a book, to be honest. But when I was younger, I used to spend almost all my free time reading. We can see again that the kind of techniques used in this kind of answer these days, to be honest, past tense, when I was younger, used to spend, right? These are techniques you can practice to actually get a higher mark. Is there anything you find hard to read? Yes, there is actually. I'm studying present continuous to become an accountant, and the textbooks are really difficult. I have to read them if I want to pass my exams though. Right, so we can see that they use the present continuous, which shows an advanced level structure. Of course, in our courses, we teach you how to do that. So quickly on an analysis, these questions deal with everyday or current topics and are therefore quite straightforward. The IELTS candidate can score highly by using fluency expressions to sound natural, such as well, oh, I'm afraid, to be honest, actually, using substitution to avoid parroting the question. I don't, yes there is, all kinds, right? Never repeat the question in your answer. Using the present simple tense to talk about regular actions. Get, use, spend, right? And quite a few different verbs. Using the present progressive tense to talk about a current action. I'm studying. This certainly makes the examiner look at you as if maybe this person's a band 7. And expanding answers by giving reasons and examples, as well as being able to use comparing a present situation with a past situation. Of course, when we practice part 1, we do a lot of this kind of work. Okay, in our courses, of course, we spend around about, on the 30-hour course, we spend around about 6 hours on developing part 1 answers, which we can guarantee that at the end of this, you would be able to analyze the question, understand the vocabulary that you need for the question, as well as being able to use these kind of fillers like I'm afraid and actually to make yourself sound a lot more natural. In our shorter courses, of course, we spend a little less time, only 2 hours on this, and then we do quite a lot of practice. But of course, all of them have practice. At the band 5.5 level, if there are any of you at that low level, which I think there are, we spend more time on developing and understanding the grammar in the questions. And so we learn not only about the grammar, but also about the kind of vocabulary and the kind of sentence structures that you can use to help develop better answers. Okay, to inquire about our courses, you can talk to Edward or contact the IELTS English Club. You can practice and talk to other people, many other people who are also doing it. Okay. In the last part of this short session, we're going to be looking at the differences between band 5, band 6, and band 7. I put this here so that you can really see what the differences are in the languages, and I think that generally this is something that's more difficult to find out about. For example, let's look at where is your hometown. For a band 5, we would have band 5 candidates have quite simple sentences, and they tend to use only the present tense and sometimes miss verbs. My hometown is Xi'an. It is nice place in central China. It famous for many things. I like my hometown because I grew up there. Right, so these are simple sentences. There are a few things like a missing verb here and a missing article here. And it's very simple. There's some good collocation. Central China, which is quite good. Famous for, which is quite good too. Many things. It famous for many things. This is quite good. But generally speaking, this would be a band 5 because it's a bit restricted. At the band 6 level, though, we can see that the sentences are more complex and some of the collocations are more complex. Collocations are words that go together. Words that go together. Move that up a bit. So we can see here that in the band 6 there are some collocations. We can see, let's get a different color. I come from Xi'an, which is one of the 4 famous capitals in Chinese history. Xi'an is in the central west of China and is one of the few walled cities left in the world. But it is also most famous for the terracotta warriors. Right, so we can see which is called a relative clause, is one of the, which is a collocation, 4 famous capitals in Chinese history. So we have which and one of the few, most famous for, and we have but. So this is a complex sentence. And the structures of this is quite good. And you go, oh, but it's only a band 6. Well, a band 7 is a little bit more complicated, right? Just a little bit more. Because we'll see that the use of the collocations and the way that the sentences are structured is a little bit more complex here. Band 7, I come from the large western city called Xi'an, which has played a major part in Chinese history for over 3,000 years. These days, it is a bustling, modern Chinese city. But there are many historical sites there, so it attracts millions of tourists every year. We can see here large western city, right? So there's a good set of adjective, noun combination here. A major part for over 3,000 years. These days, this is what we call a reflexive pronoun, of which these, those, and it. And these are indicating a band 7 level because these are often not used at a lower level. Bustling, modern Chinese city, right? Adjective, noun, right? These adjective, noun combinations are quite common in English, but they need to be in the right order. So this shows that this person understands this collocation. Historical sites attracts millions of tourists. So that the level of grammar and language is higher than the band 6, even though the band 6 is pretty good. This gives you some idea of how you can improve your language just by developing your grammar and beginning to understand collocations. But that these are things that we do focus on in our speaking course, and because this is how you can improve your speaking quite quickly. Let's have a look at another example before we finish. Now, how has your hometown changed in the last 20 years? We can see that this is has changed, right? So this is present perfect. So when you answer this question, you need to answer in the same verb tense, right? It changed a lot. Now many buildings and new subway. 就是中文句子. The second one is definitely Chinese because there's no verb. And in Chinese, this is quite acceptable with no verb. But in English, unfortunately, no. You can see big changes in everything, but traffic bad now. Before, there is no traffic. Now, we can see quite clearly here that this is generally translated from Chinese, because in Chinese, it's okay not to have the verb. It's a good try, and this candidate has understood the question, but they can't use the grammar and they can't connect their ideas. Band 6 is a bit better It has changed a lot. So they've used the correct verb tense here. I can't really remember 20 years ago, but when I was a child, there is no subway and buildings are few. Okay, there's a breakdown in past tense here. Since then, lots of things have happened. A new subway has been built. We have new shopping malls, and there are new tall office building and apartment building. So there's still some errors here. There's an error here, and there's an error, lack of plurals here, right? So, and now on band 7, of course, it's fairly good, right? There's still a few mistakes, but generally good. There have been incredible changes, right? So this really is more precise language. It's precise. When I was a child, Xi'an was relatively underdeveloped, right? A good collocation. Actually, good one to remember, actually. I suppose, even though it was still a big city. But since 2001, when China joined the WTO, Xi'an has changed and for the most part improved. Now we have better transport and living facilities, and there are also many white-collar employment opportunities as well. In general, even though pollution is a problem, I feel that Xi'an has changed into a modern dynamic city. Right, this is a very good answer, more between a band 7 and a band 8. The sentence structures are relatively complex, but not as complex as a band 8. But we can see that this candidate shows the examiner they can use the present perfect, the past tense, and the present tense, all in one answer. And this is very important. All right, so that's the end of our small introduction to part 1. Obviously, in our longer courses, we focus on a lot more than that, and we develop answers together on the next 22 slides here, and we work on your ability to use more casualization and conversational language to make you feel comfortable and relaxed. And that's the most important part. In a sense, if you learn these kind of things, you'll easily be able to impress the examiner. And you need to impress the examiner in part 1, because that's the beginning of the test. Right? To see more of our particular courses, contact Edward, and he will help you. Or join our IELTS English Club and get offline or online free advice and advice where you can talk to others. All right, it's been very nice to see you. Thank you very much for coming. We hope to see you again. And happy end of Japanese War Day. See you later. Bye.